welcome to Nourishing the Mother, where inspired women talk about the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness. We ask, in what ways can we show up more fully, live more meaningfully, parent more wholly, and love more unconditionally? How can we mine the wisdom from the experiences of our lives and expand into those challenges? If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs, so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way. And if you feel like giving a little back to this free content, please become a patron of the show and receive extra member benefits for less than a coffee a month. Or you can leave a review on iTunes and Facebook, all of which helps the podcast keep going and reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul. Head on over to patreon.com/NTM podcast to find out more. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is, I hope, a contentious conversation to mask or not to mask at this point in time where we, if you are in Melbourne with us, are in enforced lockdown for COVID, and the wearing of masks while out in public, so anywhere outside of your home, is compulsory. So that's our conversation today, and, you know, we'll talk around all the things. And as you all know, Bridget is a wealth of information on status quo and media and government. So I'm really looking forward to actually hearing all of the things that you have to say, Bridgie. So before we do that, I'd love to remind you to jump on to nourishingthemother.com.au, scrolling down to the red banner, drop in your email address, and once every so often we will shoot you off an email with links to everything that we have put out in the world so that you can dive a little deeper on the things that are important to you. So nourishingthemother.com.au. All right, Bridgie, hit me up. What's the situation?
I made like a gazillion notes. So we'll see how I can pull this down because there's a lot in it. So yes, I like to question dominant narratives. I like to question any narrative that we unquestioningly have, both inner and outer. And so when this mask directive came in, the rebel in me was like, well, fuck this, there's not enough, there's no reason to substantiate us wearing masks, and there's already reasons for, sorry. I can hear this is part of the COVID thing. We're at home recording. I can hear kids screaming my name, my name in the house. Okay, back to my train of thought. My rebel heart, my rebel heart was like, but how can we be sure that this is the right thing? This feels like domination, all of that. That's kind of where I initially went. And the beautiful thing is that I have, and I hope that you do too in your world, is I have people who people in my life who represent the way I think and the opposite of the way I think. And sometimes the people who choose the opposite stance to me are my mother and my family. And that is really beautiful to me because that is where I know there's growth. Because if I'm just, creating my own little echo chamber of people who think the way I think, I'm not growing. So there's been a few edges of growth here around seeing them unquestioningly take up the mask wearing, and my mum making me one and handing me one, and me kind of like wrestling with this internally, and seeking both mainstream media input into my thinking and, a lot of alternative approaches and, other research that challenges this dominant idea that we should all be wearing masks to try and form my own sense of it. And so I've been wrestling with it and have ultimately for myself chosen, yes, I'm going to wear a mask, and I'm wearing a mask into shops and into any other enclosed space where I'm around other people. But when I'm out walking with my kids and playing with my kids in the open air, I'm wearing a scarf up kind of above my face where I can have choice and autonomy, that when I'm not around anybody else, I can move that down and get fresh air and, you know, see my baby, see my kids, and they can see my expression. And for me, that is an exercise in my own autonomy, and also seems to me to be a wise choice, given that from what I've read, there's been very little transmission of COVID in outdoor environments like that, particularly where there's no people. So I felt really comfortable in terms of my own community responsibility there by making that choice. But bigger than that, what the mask is a symbol. And I think if we look at it from symbology, we get to understand different perspectives on it. So for some, it's a symbol of health. It's a symbol of caring for other people. It's a consideration of and concern for the community around us and for doing the right thing to protect the vulnerable. So in that case, a mask can be seen as, you know, like a pinnacle of a good human, right, who considers people beyond themselves. And this is the dominant narrative, right? So, and this is the tribal kind of thinking that, like, if you don't wear a mask, then you don't care about anybody but yourself, is part of that symbol. And then there's the symbol of the mask as something to fear or something to feel uncertain about and almost defensive, because it's been something that's been given to you to wear, but you're not quite sure that for you it represents health because you don't know enough yet, but you're still kind of doing it. And then the third one, which is where more of the conscious community comes at it from, is a mask as subordination, or the mask as surrendering of one's rights or liberties to an authority in an unquestioning way. And so they're the people who the mainstream narrative will call the conspiracy theorists, and who the more conscious community, in inverted commas, who take this viewpoint, they're the one who call the mainstream group the sheeple. So they're essentially the two different ends of the symbology spectrum, I suppose. And so that's how I look at, like, the landscape of the mask. And then bigger than that, it's the growing demand for conformity, right? So you're either conforming to wearing the mask, or you're conforming to your alternative community who's like, damn the man, and, you know, I'm not going to subordinate, and, you know, I'm not going to wear the mask, and you're looking for people to stand by you in that perspective. So it's always asking for a side, and as soon as we ask to take a side, we're instantly, like any universal law, you're creating the instant and extreme opposite. And then in the case of a directive like having to wear a mask and it being compulsory, the very imposition of order is going to create an escalation of chaos. That is a universal law. So that's why we're seeing conflict around the mask, because it's even big. It's beyond the mask. It's like the mask is the symbol for the waking up of I suppose a sleeping majority who now feel like you're either having to conform or you're not having to conform, or you're wanting other people to be protecting themselves from you, or vice versa, right? So it's so much bigger than just a mask. So when somebody says just wear a mask, it's like, yeah, well, but what do you think the mask means, right? And that's where I go with it. So in that long-winded way is my first layer of it on mask. And then I think there's another layer of, for those people who are uncomfortable with wearing masks, some of the other reasons why they might be uncomfortable. So I've spoken to friends who've experienced domestic violence or trauma, and that trauma being directly related to being actually physically stifled, like their mouth being physically stifled. And so to mask up is to re-trigger that trauma. And so that is also where, in the point of the conversation, that I want everyone to bring deep compassion to wherever you find yourself on the scale of mask agreement or disagreement, because very often the surface kind of rebel or the surface level desire to not want to conform to the mask might actually have at its root a really big trauma that that person is either unaware of or unable to meet, or not tooled up enough, particularly in an already uncertain and anxious world, not tooled up enough to work through. So that's where I see a lot of the stuff on Facebook, the super judgmental, just get over it, put your mask on stuff, is really unhelpful and quite like nasty, you know, because we actually don't really know what's going on for the people who can't, won't, or, you know, don't wear one, right? So, yeah. And then we also have the beautiful offering that you had around what.
Oh, hang on. I just thought I'd add, thank you, but I just thought I'd add one more in, which was there was someone who had commented in that thread that I posted. And I thought, yeah, you know, I hadn't thought about that either, was people that might have sensory disorders, and the wearing of a mask could be extremely challenging, or perhaps children or adults that are on the spectrum of whom find eye contact especially triggering. So being in a world where the eyes are all that is available as feedback, or, you know, in versions of communication, is also exceptionally challenging. So just as other versions of why you might choose not to wear a mask.
That's a beautiful,
just thought it was
that's a beautiful example too. And because I was thinking when I was wearing one, I was making a real big effort to make eye contact and like smile with my eyes, because it's a opportunity for me to, I guess, take off other masks that I might have, right? Like, so I've got this mask on my mouth, but is it then an opportunity to take away a mask that I might have that sometimes puts walls up to human contact, right? So that I can grow that, you know, so if we think about the law of conservation applying here, like I might not be able to communicate with my mouth or with half of my face, but where am I going to be able to amplify my communication in a different way, given that nothing's going to really be missing, it's going to be transforming. However, as you've noted, like for some people it's really triggering or difficult because of sensory issues or you know, other challenges. And then there's also, I know that a number of psychologists have communicated to the government their concern about infant mental health, because to wear a mask is really to have, you know, a real life, sometimes constant demonstration of the still face experiment, which was, you know, a really well-known experiment that looked at how infants' mental health was impacted when the mother was expressionless and not responding, which is how a masked face can be perceived by a young brain. So I think that that's an important consideration too. It's like anything, right? It's not black and white. You can't just say, just wear a mask, and the sooner we get all wear these masks, then, you know, the sooner it would all be over, right? Like we don't know that, and it's so many other factors that are part of this. But I can see how for a government who wants to have, you know, a broad acceptance of something across a large scale, they need to make it as simple as possible and without too many concessions, because then the human behavior doesn't change. Like, because I was, you know, arguing, why don't we just wear them inside? But even people will forget, or, you know, it's the blanket rule is more effective to administer and for humans to adapt to than saying, you know, you can take it off outside. Nuances. Yeah, that's right. So I can see why it's done, but I can also see why there's so much challenge around it.
So the post that I wrote was this. Would you like me to read it?
I'd love you to read it.
Okay. In Melbourne, we're now required by law to wear a mask in public or face a $200 fine. I hear my conscious sisters scream, it's a loss of personal liberty, it's repression. But you always have a choice. Choice in perception is power. As Viktor Frankl wrote, who was a Holocaust survivor, so if you haven't read his book, do. The last of our human freedoms is our ability to choose our attitude towards any given situation. And essentially, that's what he puts down to his survival, where all others around him perished during his time in a concentration camp. So I just always revisit that and love that prose. I always find it immensely powerful. So, what do you choose to believe at this time? For me, I love it to play with concealment, to invoke mystique, to reclaim the lost art of the siren, to say all that needs to be conveyed with your eyes alone, to remember the feminine is so intoxicating, less leaves room for more. To feel into a bygone era of veils and feminine eroticism. Women have used veils for centuries. Some say hymen is a veil. Others say illusion is. The veil has been used to hide one's beauty from the ravenous sight of others. It is also the equipment of the femme fatale. To wear a veil of a certain kind, at a certain time, and with a certain lover, with a certain look, is to exude an intense and smoky, erotic feminine that causes true abated breath. In feminine psychology, the veil represents women's ability to take on whatever presence or essence they wish. So do you wear your veil as a pathway to your erotic power? I do. So that was my post.
I loved it. And it totally shook up the narrative too, which I think is awesome.
Well, that's what I wanted it to do, because I so love Viktor Frankl's, among many others who have survived enormous trauma. I'm to some extent fascinated with what creates survival and what creates the psychology of death. You know? Like, I'm just always fascinated by that. And if we're all going through, in inverted commas, the same experience, what is it?
Yeah. Who thrives and who,
Yeah. Who doesn't? When the experience is essentially the same. So I'm just always fascinated by what is it in my psychology that I can train myself towards to amplify my chance of survival / thriving / what could this do in my brain and my body, rather than feeling this heaviness that depletes my energy and reduces it to nothing. I always return to big dramatic situations, but even stories of Holocaust survivors, and you and I have riffed on this before.
I love riffing on children. This. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, with groups of children. And there's, there were communities as they're moving through this that found ways to make this an adventure for the children that were in there.
Like Life is Beautiful, that film. We talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah, we have talked about that. So I'm just always fascinated in what is the nuance that we can train our brain to influence our physiology to survive something with a level of thriving and come out the other side more powerful, as opposed to what I perceive perhaps to be the two other options, which is fight the man and use all my energy to fight the man.
which is such
and
a
deplete
leakage.
myself everywhere else.
Such a leakage.
Yeah. Deplete everywhere else. Or completely toe a line and give up and acquiesce all sense of power. Both feel like a suppression for me.
Yeah.
So I'm more interested in, so I'm more interested in, what can I do here that increases health and vitality that has nothing to do with anyone else but me and my perceptions and the colour with which I filter my world and that of my children. And I just find that a really powerful place to be.
And for those, for people who feel like it's a repression, like how can you transform it into an expression? So like my first thing was, okay, can I find the most beautiful, floral, colourful masks I can that speak when I can't, right? Or, that speak physically when that part of my face can't, right? And then I have choice, and then I have like influence, and I have expression, because it's when we get attached to the form, right? And we get so obsessed with things needing to be the way that we think that they need to be, that we put our blinkers on and can't see any wider. And so I do love this exercise and this challenge for getting us to see that bigger picture, right? And getting us to build the toolkit to move through it in a way that we're not a passenger, because it's really easy to feel like you're a passenger to this whole big thing that's happening outside of us. But what if it's a birthplace of transformation? And I mean, that's been like, my husband lost his job last week, and like that was really big for us. But but I didn't miss a beat, because I thought, this isn't happening without purpose. Like there's got to be something here. And even in the last week that he's been home, like it's been amazing, like for our family and for his building of self-worth through the other things he's been doing for us and for my son. And, like when you have that lens of looking for transformation and being able to find the function in it, it's a lot easier to thrive through what feels pretty challenging, So, yeah.
It's not what happens, it's how you respond to it. Yeah, it's a really powerful one too with you guys. But in saying that, I also want our listeners to know, like, that, Julie and I have both gone through our descents through this as well. Yeah.
But I think
I've struggled way more this ISO than the previous one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I have too. I have too as well. At the beginning of it, I've kind of come out of it now. But yeah, like I'd never experienced a panic attack like what I experienced when I heard we were going into lockdown.
Yeah, again. I remember that. Yeah.
And so that also gives me enormous compassion for those who struggle with mental health on a regular basis, because this would be an exponential challenge in many ways. And I think that, you need to claw back a level of safety in your body before you can then tool up and do the work that we're talking about in terms of flipping, right? Like you've got to build the safety to be first in your body and in the experience before you can allow, your conscious brain to come online and start to see that wider picture.
So knowing all of this, what happens in your mind and body? Where do you sit on the mask or not to mask? What do you think for self, and what do you think for others?
Well, for me, I'm choosing to mask because I'm also choosing that I can take it as self-responsibility in how I choose to do what I see as healthful for the collective, because those who are having the conversations like we're having, even though we tend to surround ourselves with people who also have these conversations, this is not a mainstream thought process. And so I recognize that there are many, many vulnerable people in the community who are very, very scared. And so I don't want to use my privilege or empowerment and take that down to the shops and terrify someone who is really vulnerable right now by my choice to beat my chest and not play this game, even if it is a game, right? We don't know what's going on at a political level or at a much higher level as to what's playing out here. But I can be as embodied and anchored in myself and okay within myself to take part in this, because I can see how to not do that could be quite harmful to others who don't have the lens that I have on it.
Yeah. I just love that so much, Bridgie. Yeah, I got like full body goosebumps. I was like, yeah. Like, because we do not realize most of the time the privilege in which we exist. The privilege by virtue of that doesn't let us see it, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And I think also that I sit on some of the communities I move in are more likely to see this as conspiracy or as subordination or as control, because they've already experienced the stripping away of rights, right?
Yeah.
If we think about medical freedom and health freedoms. And so they're seeing this through that lens, and this feels scary. But I also think you can only take things one step at a time. And if you are looking for a pattern, you'll see a pattern. If you're looking for this to be a pattern of this being part of a global agenda to vaccinate the world and take away our rights and bring in a cashless society and, like further whatever Agenda 21 or whatever it is that you're terrified about, then that's all you're going to see, right? Yeah. But if you start to look at, okay, if I see destruction here, where's the creation? Where's the innovation? Where's the life where I'm only seeing death? Because it's there as well, and it's there when we open our perspective up. And I think, and if you're having doomsday thought, you're going to create a doomsday experience, and I don't want to have that. I want to have enough awareness to have a foot in both experiences, to know then what is most, aligned and of integrity for myself,
Oh, I just love it so much. I just love listening to you get political and all the things. I just love it. I'd pay for a YouTube subscription to that, Bridget. I got to say, I love a conspiracy theory. I don't subscribe, but God, I love listening to them. I really do. I love them. And
sorry, go ahead.
Do you want to go? I was going to say, well, because like you, I live with a husband who likes to counterbalance my woo with very structured, like, what the fuck planet are you on? Kind of stuff. So, of course, it's all rolling out. He'll be on there checking the daily statistics of the COVID outbreaks and all the things I don't even know, because I just don't watch any of it or listen to any of it, and it's just kind of not infiltrating my bubble. And he was like ranting the other night about one of those activist individuals who was at a shopping centre. Now, my husband called shopping centres, as part of his role. And he was like, oh my God, it was ridiculous. And she was like, and he was like getting all fired up about, this altercation with the police that this woman was having. Standing with her rights. And I think he was waiting for me to be like, yeah, she's so wrong. And I'm watching this whole thing and I'm listening to the viewer and I'm thinking, why the fuck am I having this conversation? I don't even care. When I'm standing here listening to him. And then at the end of it, I went, I kind of love her, because I think we need those people in this world, because if we didn't have those people, there would be no voice that says, stop, this isn't okay. Everybody stop and listen for a moment and check if this is a choice that works for you or a choice that doesn't. And that's what the activist does. They say stop and think with more consciousness. And so I can love that. So I can love this person who's doing just that beautiful chest beating and having all of the, push the button sentences for the police that, is very YouTubeable, all of that stuff. And I can still love her without subscribing to her choice, because I think it's our activist sisters that guide our embodied consciousness, that alter the balance of the scales to say, please stop and check, is this what you choose? And I think that's what the activist does. And I'm always grateful for the activist because of that. Because there's things that I just like the mask, I'm like, I don't really care. It's kind of fun for me. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But then I watch these sides that you're talking about play out, and I love it because it allows me the moment to go, oh, this is like a thing. I need to stop and pause and check myself. Where am I sitting in this? Let me look at both sides. No, I'm good. Off we go. But if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be doing that. So I can love that voice.
And they also, these kinds of things, I mean, they can work to entrench or bust open groupthink, because, I mean, groupthink, like if we consider that whole structure, is really not great for human evolution, because what happens is you'll just become a bunch of everybody agreeing with like the lowest common denominator, because nobody wants to be the person who challenges. And like, so we even, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on it, often these people are labeled heretics and, you know, painted to be lunatics so that, people don't want to associate.
Throughout human history, yes.
Exactly, you know. And in fact, I was thinking too, from a psycho-spiritual point of view with the masks, is how much also is what's happening with some people's feelings around it symptoms of ancestral trauma, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Of previous generation suppression, or even if you believe in a past life
for
stuff,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
Like, you were being dragged off a soapbox or burned at a stake, or, whatever else, you might have experienced as a soul. I don't discount that that's also playing out on some level in our psyches.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And then I just like it because it's kind of like dress ups and I get to play with my eyes. It's like not conscious at all.
But it's beautiful.
I was out. It's just fun. There's part of me that loves it. There's this part of me that kind of misses being able to wear dress ups. And so it feels of very,
like how much glitter can you put on your eyes?
Right. Like how much can we play with this? And I've even stood in, queues at the weekly shop with my husband, Laura, in the queue. I'm like trying to communicate with my eyes. I'm like, did you get it? And he's like, we were saying, he's going, I've got no idea like what you're trying to say right now. And I'm like, really? Let me try again.
That's so good.
Play with it too. And then I took my daughter to get her braces, because braces you can still do during COVID, fixed the other day. And of course, everything's like fully masked and sterilized to the bejeebers in, an orthodontist. But I'm sitting there with, and I love my masks. I made my masks and they're just beautiful organic linen. And so or cotton, and they just feel amazing. So there's part of me that actually just kind of loves even the color or the feel on my skin. So I had one of my beautiful, colourful ones on. And I just think it's so funny. Like, Jade and I couldn't stop laughing because everyone walks in and goes, oh, I like your mask. And I was like the new, oh, I like your shoes. And
it's so funny. But, but seriously, like I spent, I reckon, nearly an hour yesterday going through Instagram trying to decide which masks I liked. I was like so upset because all these great mask producers were out of stock. I was like, I need your mask.
I know. So
it's very fast becoming a fashion accessory in Melbourne.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And why shouldn't it be? You should still get to play with your personality and expression through the vehicle of mask and eyes. And I find that playful. And there's part of me that wants to kind of document this part in history. I don't see it as being a long-term, thing, though, who knows? And I keep saying to my kids, I want you to remember this, because it's my oldest two have to wear masks because they're 12 and over, whereas my younger ones don't. So as my older two put on masks and they're walking out of the house, and whenever we were down the beach the other day, I'm like, I want you to remember this, because there will be a time, just like the Spanish flu from, when was it, 1918 or whenever it was, and everybody was wearing masks back then. I want you to remember this time in history, because you will one day tell your children and your grandchildren about the time that you could only wear masks out and about, and the time you were locked in your home because you weren't allowed out because of this. So this will become part of our human history, and you're living it.
So amazing.
How amazing to really just sink into, look around. You will never in your life see a version of this again. Take it in, breathe it in. This is history, and you're living it as you walk down the street. And one day it will be the story you tell. So absorb your story, like it's just.
And on that note, like, it's a really beautiful opportunity to teach older children about history and critical thinking, because and to look at the ads that you see on TV and look at the dominant narrative, because as we know, history is told through the lens of the victors. And history is told through the lens of the dominant culture or dominant gender. And so truth is in the eye of the beholder, right?
So good, isn't it?
So that's a really great conversation to have with your kids. And I'm having it a little bit with my 7-year-old, because they very easily children will just take on board the dominant family viewpoint. And this is a really good opportunity for them to empathize with other people's experiences and to see all of the different ways in which people could be experiencing this time, and how they might have the beliefs that they have. It's a really great teaching opportunity to give our children a sense, a greater lens to see the world right now.
Yeah, 100%. So would you love to leave our gorgeous conscious sisters who are listening with, Bridgie?
I would love you to find some stillness wherever you sit within this topic, and to get really quiet and with yourself around what you're making it mean and what you want to remember yourself by through this, and how, if you do feel like your energy is leaking out, how you can bring it in a more conscious way and see a bit wider, and to see a bigger picture. And if this is something that you want to consciously move through, and maybe like me, you've perhaps experienced family shifts with job losses or other challenges going on during COVID, I am running a 5-day online program called Evolve with Suburban Sandcastles, and it will be 5 days, 5 lives with me to really deepen and embody some of what I teach, to help you be less of a passenger during this, and to feel activated and inspired even in a time of uncertainty. So that would be my invitation to you if this resonates.
Oh, please do it. No one teaches being able to get a hold on your perspective and lens and create the life that you want the way that you do. So I would do that in a heartbeat. So we'll make sure we put the link to that on the bottom of the show notes so that you can go check it out if you're really ready to bust any and all stories that you have and move your life in a more aligned conscious direction. Then Bridgie would definitely be a guide for that. So to connect with you, Bridget, it's suburbansandcastles.com. And you, Jules? Is thepleasurenutritionist.com, and we're on nourishingthemother.com.au, Nourishing the Mother on Facebook, Instagram and Pinterest.
Yes, so remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
And if you want to support Nourishing the Mother and all the late nights, the early mornings, the blood, sweat and tears we pour into our art, then please go to patreon.com/NTM podcast and become our patron. As a patron, you're helping all of the cost of operating this podcast, the hosting, the editing, the transcription, helping all of that be completely covered, and joining a community who are all about honouring our journeys and continuing to open. The more support we have, the longer we can last. So become a patron. We'd love to have you. Go to patreon.com/NTM podcast. We literally couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for listening, and please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.